Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.
What does a werewolf live for? What is the point of my being? I've been away from home for a long while on my journeys into the north of Scotland. The surfing and the snow sports were fun, and I've had a young distraction on the way home, a little lady called Sally. You may have listened to the podcast on my little excitement with the hitchhiker. Please do. I almost cared for someone. Yeah, you heard that right. Almost cared. It all ended badly, so now I've returned to the ordinary things in my life. I've returned to Manchester, back to my lovely art studio. Well, I call them ordinary, but I suppose they're pretty extraordinary, really. Malcolm, who hopefully you've met, is waiting for me in my private garage. Yet again, there's another podcast you can listen to about my mate Malcolm. I'd messaged ahead, and he's going to help me bring up the meat from the defender's boot to the freezers above. I can only keep fresh meat for so long, and do you know what? I can't really have too many locals in this area disappear. If too many persons become missing persons, then the police do all that detectoring business and may find me by, triangulating shit and finding patterns. I've seen the TV shows, and that's how cunts get caught. It's almost impossible to catch someone killing someone they do not know without a motive. Honestly, try it. Kill a random stranger somewhere in the wild. Obviously, you've got to take some responsibility to hide your actions. I find it gets complicated if you're somewhat flagrant in your manner of murder. Then just walk away. It is incredibly unlikely that you'll get caught. So I have to do my work so they never find patterns or reasons for my killing. Murdering kind of rarely tends to be a personal thing. It tends to be them in the right place at the wrong time in the majority of cases. So I tend to store and freeze meat so that I can eat it all the time round without always harvesting from the local area fresh. You know me, I can be a dick at times, so I don't really want to be caught. Unless I want to. I like Malcolm. Well, again, like is a strong word. I can tolerate him, which is about as close as to like as I can get. He's my henchman. I introduced you to him in the episode past. Malcolm is a study into himself and an outstanding work of art as a human being. We lugged the meat into the elevator at the end of the car park. Venison and other meats were on the little handcart that brought the flesh from the vehicle to the large service elevator that serviced the various floors of my converted warehouse.
"How were your adventures up north, boss?"
asked Malcolm. Well, the surf was high at Brim's Nest. Really nice barrels off the left-hand side of the reef. Snow was okay-ish at Aviemore, you know what Scotland's like. The herds there were big, the people were stupid, and the hunting was fun, I told him. Succinct but factual.
"Anything else happened of any significance, sir? You've been away for a significant length of time, so I would think that something significant happened."
Well, that's a lot of significant, Malcolm. Nothing very significant happened, really, Malcolm. We did a lot of hunting, me and Fen, so we've got enough meat for the next few months. I scratched my head in thought, trying to remember the good stuff that happened. By the way, don't eat the stuff labelled with the red tape, though. And in fact, see that stuff? I pointed to a pile of flesh. Please send that to the local food bank as packaged pork. You may have to do some butchering, but I know you like it. Let the people feed upon themselves. Ha ha ha, I laughed. This idea thoroughly amused myself and Fen. We often presented meat to the local charities and the older people's homes for a laugh. I'd bought Braithwaite's Butchery about 5 years ago, so that I had a way of getting rid of the significant amounts of waste meat my adventures produced. People always wonder how you get rid of bodies. They bury them or do something stupid like feed them to pigs. They've never thought about laundering the bodies like you would dirty cash. Meat's expensive. You can make money. You buy a respectable business and then you pump that spare flesh through it. I sell human flesh and get paid for it. Do you think they test that meat's DNA for its species? Do you? Or do you think you can slip the licensing for a few extra pigs in there? Humans are so daft in how they treat dead humans. I eliminate most of my unwanted bodies through butchery and food processing facilities. Ground meat is ground meat. Enjoy your burger as you pay for my murders. It also makes me laugh that cannibalism is not against the law. You can eat human flesh until your heart is content. It's just other fucking boring laws that stop us from being able to get that flesh in any other way than by breaking them. Sad, really. Anyway, sorry, back to the story. Oh no, wait a minute, Malcolm. I fell in love with a wee Scottish lass, killed her family, and left her with a mess, I told him.
Ah, just the usual kind of thing then, sir.
He laughed. Aye, just the usual. How is everyone and everything going in the installation?
Well, I'm sorry, but we've lost a couple of the exhibits, boss. I've videoed the deaths. They were long drawn out and extremely painful, but the infection had rooted too deep even for the intravenous antibiotics,
he said, obviously feeling downcast and somewhat apologetic. Oh no. Well, we can always grab another couple of bodies off the street and bring them back to the work. They're just a bit too weak-assed to survive for very long. I've got this brilliant idea though, Malcolm. It's going to be an amazing installation, but it will take some searching to get the venue right, I said. In my home in Manchester, I have my art studio. It's unlike other studios due to the materials I work with. I mainly work with living flesh to produce my pieces. I've spoken in the past about specific works, but I'm very proud of the particular work I will undertake in this story. I did this piece in an abandoned warehouse unit down by the canal. It's often difficult to find these places now due to the ridiculous land prices in the city, so it took a long time for my witless assistant Malcolm to find a spot for me. Actually, witless is a bit cruel, let's go for hapless. The warehouse was just outside the gay quarter of the city and was a horrid, dirty, rat-infested, perfect site to do some horrible shit to the innocent and call it art. He was a handsome someone I'd picked up in a bar on Canal Street. We'd talked and he had told me drunkenly how he was a closeted homo, too scared to allow the world to know that one of his favourite foods was cock. He was a nice enough guy, but I was not recruiting him for his winning personality or his rapacious want for cock. I was recruiting him for two reasons. One was that he was available and in the right place at the right time, and the other was that he was big and buff. He would be the perfect material for this piece. Oh, by the way, I'm no homophobe. On the contrary, I'm a homophile. I am what humans call bisexual, but what my posit fen calls fucking greedy. I like sex with men, women, and any mix of the two you can name. I just like sex, to be honest, in all of its forms. If I look for easy prey, I fear gay men are the easiest. Gay men are much easier to get hold of than the next most accessible source of material, the hetero woman, because gay men do not need much wooing to get them into your clutches and by themselves. In fact, if you use Grindr, it is a little like a food delivery service where you pick your dish and 9 times out of 10 it'll turn up at your door in the next half hour, leaving no one with an idea of where it's gone. Easy meals, a gay on wheels. Sorry if this offends anyone's sensibilities, but it's what I've found to be the case over the past few years. Well, he had failed the first test to see if he would survive this experience, which was to notice me slip the Rohypnol into his drink. He'd got an F for fucked up as a result of the final exam, and that meant he could not say no to what would happen to him for the next few hours. Does a lack of consent mean that he consents to his use? I'm not sure, to be honest. Well, I am, but I don't give a fuck because I'm a monster you might know about. Malcolm and I had wheelchaired him into the space that would be the site of my work. The room was beautiful and large, just a breeze block shell with girders supporting a corrugated iron roof. A bit windy and a bit cold. There was a pit in the floor and evidence of oil, mess and leftover bits, suggesting that this site had once been home to a host of mechanics. Handily for me, it still had the mechanics' floor pits, the block and tackle on one girder, and the chain and pulley system that goes with it. This was the most necessary part of the process for me. Why it was necessary, I will go into in a moment, you nosy whoosits. I changed into my werewolf form to deal with the roughly 15-stone muscly guy. In this form, I can lift him up and down and move him around without much effort or stress on my body. I could do it as a human if I wish, but I like the idea of the man in a drug-addled state having to mentally deal with a werewolf manipulating him. Can you imagine being out of your proverbial gourd on drugs and having a full-on werewolf move you around? Malcolm, my drugs expert, was acting as a pharmacist for this operation. Part of the process was to experience the experience. Malcolm would be putting together a wee Molotov cocktail of drugs to make the man a little more amenable and lucid to the horror that would happen to him. The chemical mix was that of lignocaine and ketamine. I like using ketamine because you can use super high doses on people without fear of them ODing. I know it sounds strange that you can't OD on a veterinary painkiller, but for some reason you can't. A lignocaine would mean the early stages of the event would be done with little involvement from the human. I would wait until the pharmaceuticals had worn off slightly before letting the true torture begin. Otherwise, it would be like wearing a jacket indoors before going out. He wouldn't feel the benefit. He dangled by his wrists from the chain. He was about 4 feet above the pit. The block and tackle meant I could easily lift him up and down, changing his height from the floor as necessary. His feet hung near the floor and were untied. Only his wrists were a point of restraint, and I had made those restraints as comfortable as possible so that he would not feel any considerable discomfort from hanging from them. I wanted all the hurt to be found elsewhere. He had the drugs administered and had unfortunately puked on himself as he hung naked from the chain. Luckily, we could lower him again and sluice him off so he looked okay for the cameras. We always want the best quality footage for our viewers. I sat impatiently on the pit's edge, still in my were form, ready to light the thin layer of petrol covering the charcoal in the bottom of the pit. Malcolm stood furtively, picking his acne and then flicking those pickings into the pit. He looked a proper psycho in those thick bottom glasses, hideous sandals and socks. He was as excited as I was to see how this would go. He was really developing a delightfully dark sadistic side and learning to lack the guilt for it that he would have had in the past and used to castigate himself with. The man came back to consciousness, not with an abrupt start, but with a long, thin whine. He slowly opened his eyes and saw me sitting as my werewolf at the pit's edge. He must have thought that he was still dreaming, as he did not seem to question the fact that an 8-foot wolfman was sitting there looking at him while swinging its legs. He glanced away from me as he realised he was in pain for some reason and looked up at his bound wrists with a bit of a look of puzzlement. His shoulders must have been in some agony by now, as he had been hanging there for a good while. I think he was still in a state of disbelief, as he just gave the chain a brief wiggle and laughed. The ketamine must be good shit if this was the result. He spotted Malcolm, who looked like the parody of a man and must have been quite impossible to believe existed as an actual human when not off your face on A-class drugs. The man smacked his lips. "Water," he said with a cracked voice. Weird. No request for escape, but a request for water. Well, that was easy enough. I nodded at Malcolm and he dipped a mop in the water and pushed it to the man's lips. The man suckled on the mop, making happy sounds as he slurped. Well, this was an unexpected outcome. I expected him to panic and freak out on waking, but he seemed a little muzzy and thirsty. Once he had his fill of water, the mop was removed and again I stood before him. He looked at me, then up at his hands, then back at me, and just fucking giggled. Well, great art always has its strange paths, so I continued the plan I'd set out for this day. I pointed down at the charcoal when his bleary eyes noticed me again. I kept pointing down until he looked where I was indicating at the charcoal briquettes, and then raised his eyes back to mine. He was dealing well with everything that was going on. I mean, he was hung from a ceiling naked in front of a monster over what looked like a giant barbecue, and he didn't seem to give a shit. You're a doggy?" he said, looking at me. Somewhat imprecise, but I could accept the general overall feeling of the situation. I nodded. You're a big human doggy," he stated and questioned at the same time. I nodded again. He smiled and laughed. I lifted my hand so that he could follow it. I had a small firelighter clutched in my claw, and I presented it to Malcolm, who lit the little block with a tremendous ceremony. Honestly, it was like a miniature lighting of the Olympic torch. The flame leapt onto the block and I lifted it above my head where the big man could see it. I then tossed it into the charcoal, where it gave its flame to the petrol layer with a whoosh. The man had watched this whole process with a great level of interest. He observed the little brick fly through the air and land in the mass of fuel on the floor. The whoosh made him jump initially, but he watched intently as the petrol took light. Not a worry at all came upon his face. Oh, how it burned so merrily. As an animal I should fear fire, but not I. For me it was raw chaos. The floor of the pit had been laid in charcoal and grit. I wanted it to burn, but I wanted it to be an even and controlled heat. In most circumstances, I like my meat raw, but it would be interesting to see if I could keep this guy alive through most of the cooking process. The problem is that humans can only live within a narrow temperature band. Once their core temperature goes above or below 35 degrees centigrade, or for you others it's 95 degrees Fahrenheit, they die. It's interesting why that is the case. They die quickly, as the enzymes that control most of our necessary chemical reactions are very temperature specific. Outside our small temperature range, they stop working and humans die. I lowered him now as the heat rose off the hot coals. The first heat wash hit his body and the flesh at his feet sizzled slightly. He was too medicated to be overly affected by his initial burn, but I was sure that as things went on his body would alter, and that would change, especially as the pain built through the burning. I also learned from bitter experience that you must be careful how quickly you burn living things. The pain-sensing nerves in the skin are not too far beneath the surface, so you have to be careful how deep you damage it. I know, I couldn't believe it either. If you burn through the skin layer, they no longer feel pain. It's fucking mad, eh? And also, no fun when it happens. I held him at a height where he just started slightly blistering at the feet. The first indication that something was wrong with the man was when he began to moan and lift his feet from the pit, trying to get them higher than the burn. This was entertaining in itself, as he would only be able to hold his feet in that manner bent at the hips for a short while, and then he would have to let them fall back to the original position. I had my eyes on a very accurate temperature readout app linked to the anal thermometer currently residing in the man's ass. As soon as the core temperature got higher than 35.5 Celsius, we would swing him from above the pit and then dip him and douse him in cold water until that temperature fell back to 35. This, I've got to admit, was all experimental, so I didn't know how it would work. But sometimes you have to try a thing many times before you get it right, don't you find? The smell of burning hair became prevalent to my super-sensitive scenting smell sense. I then got a hint of the gently roasting flesh. His feet were starting to cook. He began to scream in intense agony as his skin blistered and crackled. Malcolm could just be heard giggling over the sound of the man's agony. I had redirected Malcolm's lust for children into a sadistic beast who took joy in real sensations given off by someone at the end. I loved it when he was enjoying himself, but he would have to pay more attention so that he didn't die too quickly. He lifted the man from the heat, and the man continued to scream as the burns that had been made still wrecked his mind and body. No relief from those burns made, just less damage being done. He would last longer in this state. I could see the pain and the tension on the man's face. His jaw was clenched as he now screamed, his mouth locked closed, yet he screamed through that closed mouth. The choked sound became more and more intense. It built and built until the point of orgasm as he crushed his own teeth from the pressure he generated with his jaws. More pain, more pain. The coward then passed out, trying to escape the pain. "No!" I yelled, pointing at Malcolm. "No!" The body was swung and dunked into the water. As the body entered the cold liquid, he came back to us. Shock racked him. The mouth and abused O was open, and I could see the bloody maw of broken wreckage that was once teeth. Oh, the thrill that buzzed through my body, the joy at the torment the man felt. The hair on the back of my hairy neck rose as he suffered. It was truly beautiful. Once the man was back in our world of hurt, Malcolm swung him once more over the heated pit of fun. He still had enough focus left to look down at the pit and coals and recognise it as the source of his torment. I was now clapping and cheering in my wolfy vocals as the man was lowered over the pit again. How long would he last? He could not keep this up for long. He would soon die of too much. What do I mean by that? The experience, well, that it was just too much sensation, too much horror, just too much for him. As he was lowered, the hot coals began to cause the crackle of flesh again. Then it sadly happened. The body flashed into a flame like on a long candle wick. It went up from the feet to the head in a roaring torrent of fire. Burning liquid fat flew in all directions as that body on the chain shook and writhed at its rattling fixing. Malcolm was patting the flecks of fat-fueled flame off his clothing as he capered in a whooping dance of joy as his eyes were fixated on the burning, screaming torso. He was ecstatic. I was a bit disappointed, to be honest. Shit, the body fat must have got to the point where it flashed into fire and flame. What a shitty thing to happen. Now the thing on the string shook and wiggled as it yelled and flew back and forth with a violence and an energy that only agony can create in a man. The noise I knew couldn't last, as the fire had now covered him and ate away at his body, removing his skin, his flesh. His lungs would be scalded and burned, his lips would be gone, and with all an inability to inhale due to the loss and damage of burning tissues. Scream, scream, scream. Intense shaking on the chain. This was beautiful, I suppose, and I'd had to wipe a tear of joy from my eye. The vision before me was, well, to be honest, it was flawless in this moment, but it was fleeting. Dripping flames fell into the pit. They were falling from the toes of the man. The image was hypnotizing. I closed my eyes and raised my head to the room's ceiling. In my head, I could feel the fire run over the surface of my own flesh. I could feel the feedback to my senses, calm as the pain reduced, as all was taken away from him, as those pain receptors were burnt away. The screams had less energy. There was less energy rattling that chain. Scream fades. The rattle leaves the coruscating chain, then stillness. The man is dead and hung still, although still alive with flame. The skin is blackened. Only now does my sense of smell really kick in. The stink is an intermediate between abhorrent and delightful. Burnt hair and freshly fried tender bites assail my nostrils. Fat is still dripping, crackling into the fire as it hisses away, then silence except for the roil of the charcoal. The flames wink out and die on the surface of the chained figure, leaving a black charcoal husk, its surface covered in a hardened black crust of burnt carbon. The hanging man now looks unreal, never human. It seems as though it was never a living being. He resembles a modelling clay man made by a child and left in the heat to morph and stretch. It's fucking beautiful. The face is all burnt and cracked. Lips are broken and lifted slightly from the teeth. Beautiful teeth that stand out in perfect shiny white contrast to the black matte carbon of the burnt flesh. His nose has melted to show the open nasal cavity with its bony septum. His eyes have sunk deep into the orbits. He looks as though he's trying to hide his eyes from my own. Can you imagine the pain as an eyelid is burnt away and that fire hits your eyes like a big pizza pie that's amore? Or would you have been blinded before? Lost the ability to sense the loss of your eyes before the eyelids were gone? Oh, the shivers that pass through my bodies. I'm lost in my imagination of the experience from his point of view. If I could only ask him about that experience he went through, get him to describe the sensations and how they changed over time. Maybe it would be different with the next one. I can keep them in a fit enough condition to do so. I must be able to do, just tease them with flame enough to get a sense of their ordeal from their lips, as it were. Post-orgasmic guilt now at how quickly it was over. We'll do better next time, I smiled and nodded at Malcolm, who dropped the waste into the pit. He would come back late to clean it up, and plans for further fun would come to fruition. Thanks for listening. There's Twitter and Instagram handles in the description. There's also the Facebook group, if you want to come and join us chatting there. It's brilliant. I like everyone there. It's good fun. It's nice to meet people who think like I do. Maybe they think like you do.
Bye.
Brought to you in association with Grendel Press. This is Werewolf the Podcast, a serial killer drama.